Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Talks with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. I'm Ariana Gonzalez from Chug Attorneys and CPAs, tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Gladys Gervasio from our Los Angeles office. Hi there, Gladys, and welcome.
Hi, Ariana. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about the updates for the H-1B lottery and everything you need to know for fiscal year 2027. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started, this conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So if you do have any questions about today's topic, please feel free to send us an email anytime at info@chug.com. We'd love to help you out. So Gladys, now that the lottery mechanics have changed, what are the biggest practical changes employers should really be focused on for fiscal year 2027?
Well, what employers are realizing is that the H-1B process no longer begins and ends with the selection or the lottery. It has turned into a much longer life cycle that starts months before registration and can extend well past the approval of the petition. Decisions about how our role is structured, how compensation is set, and how dependent a company is on H-1B workers now matter far earlier. And those decisions carry through the entire process. Employers who wait until after selection to think through all of these issues often find themselves boxed in.
Yeah, which really means the stakes are much higher, much earlier in the process. And one of the biggest examples of that early decision making shows up at registration, and especially when it comes to wages. So employers now have to include wage information at registration. Why does that matter beyond just selection?
Well, it matters because it now creates early accountability, right? When an employer discloses a wage level at registration, they are effectively staking a position on how senior, how complex, and how independent the role is. And that position doesn't disappear after selection. It follows throughout the case filing, the review, the issuance of the visa. So each employer needs to be comfortable standing behind that classification consistently. So if a role is registered at a higher level to reflect, let's say, senior responsibilities, but later on internal documents would show close supervision or entry level duties, that inconsistency can raise questions not only with USCIS, but also during the consular review.
There's been talk about potential legal challenges to some of these changes. Should employers wait and see before planning, or what do you recommend?
Well, waiting is not necessarily a good strategy here. Immigration rules are frequently challenged, but employers should plan based on what is in effect right now, not on what might change later. So the reality is that many of these changes require internal coordination with HR, finance, legal, leadership, and that can't happen overnight. So employers who delay planning often end up rushed and exposed. So if an employer waits until registration to assess wage strategy or fee exposure, then that's not going to be enough time to restructure roles or budgets thoughtfully.
Absolutely, that proactive mindset is key. And planning also has to account for cost because one of the most talked about changes is a new fee that's getting a lot of attention. Let's talk about the $100,000 H-1B fee. What is it, and what problem is the government trying to solve with this? What insight do we have here?
Well, the 100,000 H-1B fee is aimed at employers which the government views as overly reliant on the H-1B program. It's not designed to affect every employer. It's a policy tool meant to discourage maybe business models that depend heavily on H-1B workers while still allowing sponsorship for truly specialized critical roles. So the key point is that this fee applies per petition is added on top of the regular filing fees. And so it dramatically increases the cost of sponsorship for affected employers. So for some employers, the total government fees alone for a single H-1B could exceed, 6 figures, which forces a very different cost benefit analysis than in prior years.
Yeah, that kind of cost certainly changes the equation a bit. And naturally, one of the first questions employers might ask is whether this fee applies across the board. Does the $100,000 fee apply to every H-1B filing?
No, it does not. And that's an important distinction. Under current agency guidance, this 100,000 H-1B fee generally applies when a petition requests for or is approved for consular notification. When a petition is approved as a change of status or an extension of stay, the fee does not apply. So there are also very limited waiver provisions, but they are quite narrow and should not be assumed as part of standard planning.
And how does this fee change how employers should think about H-1B sponsorship overall?
Well, it does force the employer to move away from viewing H-1B sponsorship as, a routine HR function. Instead, it becomes a strategic investment decision. Employers should ask whether the role is essential, long-term, and aligned with business growth before committing. Immigration costs now need to be part of, a much broader workforce and financial planning. So some employers are choosing to sponsor fewer individuals, but investing more deliberately in those roles with clear and long-term value.
Hmm. And once sponsorship does become a strategic decision, it also raises the question of whether H-1B should always be the default option. Does this environment make alternative visa options more important?
Yes, for sure. And we see that every day when we're speaking with potential clients, as the costs rise and scrutiny increases, employers would benefit from evaluating all available immigration options earlier in the hiring process. And a single path strategy, let's say just focus on H-1B, is now far riskier than it used to be. So having alternatives creates flexibility if one route becomes impractical. So depending on the role and the candidate, an employer may explore cap exempt options, intra-company transfers, such as, the L1s, the L1A, the L1B, extraordinary ability visas, and even consider, starting the permanent residence process earlier.
So the government has also announced expanded screening and vetting for H-1B and H-4 applicants. What does that really mean?
Expanded screening means, deeper background checks and closer review of both individual applicants and the employer. This includes reviewing immigration history, employment details, even reviewing social media accounts of the beneficiaries and the applicants, and just consistency across the filing. So most applicants will still be approved, but the process may involve more questions, longer interviews, or additional administrative review. So applicants may be asked to clarify job duties in more detail, or be asked about their social media accounts, or provide additional background information before a visa can be issued.
So even well-prepared cases may take a bit more time and attention. Let's talk about where in the process that impact is most noticeable. At what point in the process are employers and employees most likely to feel this expanded vetting?
Well, it's being implemented across the board with USCIS, with CBP at the ports of entry, with the consulate. But right now, the most impact probably is felt at the consular stage after the petition has already been approved. Many employers assume that approval is the finish line, but in reality, visa issuance has been a more meaningful checkpoint. So a petition may be approved quickly, but visa issuance could take weeks, and we're seeing that several months or even longer due to the additional security review.
Yeah, that's an important reminder that approval isn't the final step, and it's not just principals who are affected, families are part of this too. So are H4 spouses and children also affected by this expanded screening?
Yes, so dependents are explicitly included. Spouses and children may also experience separate review timelines, even when the principal applicant is approved without issue. So this can affect family relocation, employment authorization, and even school planning. So it's not uncommon for a principal applicant to receive a visa while dependents' applications may still remain under review.
So these delays can have real life implications for families. From an employer perspective, that also affects hiring and onboarding timelines. Should employers expect longer onboarding timelines for international hires?
Yes, and in many cases, most of the cases, yes, employers should plan for the possibility that visa issuance will take longer compared to prior years. Flexibility around the start date and the onboarding expectations is increasingly important. So some employers are building contingency plans, such as delayed start date or temporary remote work to account for visa delays.
Definitely. With longer timelines becoming more common, some people worry that delays also mean higher risk. Does expanded screening mean a higher chance of denial?
Well, not necessarily. The majority of cases are still approved. What has changed is the depth of the review and the time required. Delays are far more common than outright denials, especially for well-documented cases and straightforward cases. Cases with clear job roles and consistent documents, they tend to move forward even if additional review is required.
So preparation still goes a long way. Let's talk specifically about how employers can set themselves up for success at the interview stage. How should employers prepare for the more detailed visa interviews?
Employees should be able to clearly explain who they work for, what their role is, and how their work fits into the employer's business. Answers should align with what was filed in the petition, and they have to be confident and consistent, even with more technical language. If an employee describes their role, quite differently than what appears in the petition, it can certainly trigger further questioning or delays.
Definitely. So how important is employer credibility under this new environment?
I'm glad you brought that up because employer credibility is more important now than ever. And officers are evaluating whether the employers appear compliant, transparent, well organized, strong documents, and consistency, of course, across all their filings help establish that trust. So employers with clean compliance histories and clear organizational structures tend to experience smoother processing.
Can you tell us what this means for long-term workforce planning?
Immigration planning now needs to be multi-year and integrated into broader business strategy. Employers may need to think earlier about succession planning, permanent residence sponsorship, and reducing over-reliance on temporary visas. So some employers are starting green card processes earlier on in the process to create stability and reduce future visa risk.
So should employers or employees be worried about sponsoring dependents given increased scrutiny? What do we know about this?
Well, worried isn't the right word, but it would be informed. Dependents remain eligible to join the principal applicant, but families should plan for less predictable timelines and build flexibility into relocation plans. And families may delay travel or housing decision until visas are actually issued, like for some clients, I would advise them to let the principal applicant travel first and ensure that he's able to enter and he's set up first before having the family join him later on.
Have you guys seen that certain industries are feeling these changes more than others, or what's your perspective here?
Industries with a historically high H-1B usage, such as technology, consulting, engineering, and healthcare, they're feeling the cost and scrutiny more acutely for these sectors. Early planning is critical, and companies, of course, that hire in large volumes are reassessing whether all the roles truly require H-1B sponsorship.
So what would you say employers should be doing right now to prepare for all of this?
Now is the time for internal review. Employers should evaluate workforce composition, upcoming sponsorship needs, cost exposure, and alternative options well ahead of filing of this H-1B cap season. Early planning creates flexibility that simply isn't available later. So identifying potential fee exposure early allows employers to adjust hiring and budgeting before commitments are made.
And all of that planning leads us to the bigger picture. I want to ask you one more question, Gladys. If there's one thing employers and employees should walk away with heading into fiscal year 2027, what's the advice that you can give?
The H-1B program is still very much available. It's still in place, but it requires intention. Employers and employees who plan early, budget realistically, and communicate clearly will be far better positioned than those who treat immigration as a last minute exercise. So, organizations that approach immigration as part of long term workforce strategy tend to experience fewer surprises and better outcomes.
Thank you so much, Gladys, for taking the time to share all of these insights with us. If you are watching this and have any questions about this topic, feel free to reach out to us anytime at info@troop.com. We'd love to help you out with this or any of the other services we provide. That is all we have time for today. So this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you everybody for joining us today. A special thank you to Gladys for taking the time to be here with us today. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to send us an email anytime at info@troop.com. And make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everybody. See you next time. Thanks, Gladys.